Welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. I'm with Natasha, the pro CPO, Conrad, the innovator, and I'm Zach, your expert on procurement, and we join you with almost 70 years of practical procurement experience. Hope you've been enjoying the episodes so far. Today's a good one. Today we're going to be jumping into one of our top predictions for 2025, which we said was getting the basics right. And we thought it would be good to have an episode just to discuss what we mean by getting the basics right. So all over the world, procurement teams are being asked to do more with less while dealing with technological disruption. And Natasha, you talked about it really well in the last episode. You talked about how you're observing procurement teams chasing advanced tech and looking for some kind of silver bullet, but still they're quite at a low level of procurement maturity, at the abacus level, as you put it. So we're going to dive into this today. What are the procurement basics? Why are teams getting them wrong? And what are the practical strategies to address them? So I'll kick us off with Natasha. First of all, what are the basics? Natasha, what would you say is the most basic thing procurement leaders should be doing?
Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, whoever is listening. What are the procurement basics? I think one of the most important ones and the fundamental or foundational one is alignment with business objectives. We procurement people are very passionate about our field, and we often lead with the importance of savings because it fuels growth, or importance of category strategy because it paves the way for our stakeholders to get the newest market intelligence. Or we're leading with the importance of reducing supplier base because it will reduce operational expenses of supplier management. But that all may be a moot point for, let's say, a CFO who is preoccupied with innovation, with growth, with cost of capital, and with profitability. It may not strike the right accord with a CEO who is interested in geographic expansion, in increasing customer retention, and in expanding product lines, right? So I think one of the first fundamental basic that we have to we procurement people have to remember is that how do we align our business objectives with the company's objectives, and how do we know exactly what's a driving factor for company growth. And I think we talked about it in previous episodes that we need to start losing our attachment to procurement terminology. But I also think that what we haven't talked about, and maybe we can talk about it in the future episodes on Touch today, is that how do we switch from functional mindset to the enterprise mindset? And how do we start building our aspirations, not just based on what we as a function should deliver to the company, but also what the company really needs at this given point of time.
So where are procurement teams going wrong then, Natasha? I mean, you're talking about the functional mindset move to an enterprise mindset, and that we need to get out of using all the procurement terminology, et cetera. So what in your experience are procurement teams doing wrong, procurement leaders doing wrong when it comes to this particular basic?
Maybe one of them is actually lack of stakeholder engagement, right? And let's be practical about it. Let's leave our listeners or viewers with a practical example. There's something, there's a tool that I've used for many years in the past that worked very well for me. It's called stakeholder map, right? And stakeholder map outlines, wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing it. So in stakeholder map outlines how are we connected? And if I take, for example, marketing as a team that we need to build relationships with. As a procurement leader, it's very important for me to ensure that we have an ongoing communication cadence with all the key stakeholders. And if you look at the map, it's structured as an org chart. Who we have on the top of the stakeholder? We have chief marketing officer, who have two first lieutenants, VP of media and VP of creative, who under them have senior directors responsible for integrated media, for marketing operations, for communication design, for production, and so forth. So first, we outline all type of stakeholders that we're working with in a hierarchy of those stakeholders. Then, if you pay attention to how the boxes are framed, they are in color. Green color indicates it's a perfect relationships. It's a love fest. We are working with them very organically. There's a great synergy. Communication is happening to us naturally. We're on the same page. Our strategies are aligned. So greens, a thumbs up. This is what we're thriving to. Gray is maybe a person is new to the organization, or a person is new to the role, or just learning the field, or maybe procurement manager is the new one who just came to the field. So gray, it doesn't indicate trouble. It indicates that we just need to build connection. We just need to spend more time together and get to know each other a little bit better. Orange, however, indicates that we need to pay attention and we need to work on building the connection, building communication, building better understanding of each other's priorities.
Hey, Natasha, this is a really cool map. I noticed that it's focused on a category. So when you've worked with your team on this, have you build this, or you build it together, and then each of your sort of category leads that map out to the organization keep this up to date, or how do you actually put this into action within your organization?
So I usually, being a lead for the procurement organization, suggest that we build this map, and then it's a responsibility of my direct reports to have it as one organic illustrative document. But it's built up by the managers and directors of the procurement team. And this map is usually shared with the stakeholders as part of the category strategy review, saying that, are we working with the right people? Are we indicating the health of the relationships in the right color? Would you agree that we're gray? Would you agree that we're in orange? It also helps to open the doors to start the conversation about, what do we need to fix about our relationships? Why are we missing each other by a mile? Or maybe we're just missing each other by a yard. And if so, maybe we're much closer. I think it serves as a healthy baseline on who are we working with, what's the health of our relationships, and also, as you see in the bottom underneath the name and underneath the position, it says, for example, with the CMO, CPO meets quarterly, VP meets semi-annually. That also indicates frequency of interaction, and it prepares both sides that, hey, we're not going to be seeing each other on an ongoing basis, for example, as it would be with managers, because they will be meeting regularly, right? So for them, there's no need to define the cadence. But maybe for the higher level within organizations, it is necessary to indicate that we will have enough experiences to share and information to deliver for us to meet regularly on monthly, quarterly, or semi-annual basis.
Yeah, I see this could be a really cool, a very useful tool for the one-on-ones with my direct reports as well, just to kind of assess how are they doing, how are those connections going, how are these people when's the last time you met with them? It'd be a really helpful. I mean, obviously, you could spend an entire one-on-one just kind of talking through the details behind the boxes. So, figure out how to do that. But this is really cool. Thank you for sharing it.
I agree. I've seen a lot of stakeholder maps, Natasha, and this is probably the best one I've seen in terms of how it lays things out, the color coding, and it just gives you a lot of information in one place. And I do think it facilitates a great conversation with your team around the relationships. So it's a great exercise to do, and maybe we're following up every quarter, every 6 months to see how the relationships are progressing. Do you then just trust that the relationships, if they're good, they will just feed into the category strategies and the overall procurement strategy? Or do you have to do something more deliberate to, once you have these relationships in place, to then help you? Did you need to do more to align with the business strategy? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Or, is it just a case of you have to have a strong relationship and the rest will work itself out?
Well, strong relationships don't happen on their own, right? Strong relationships are the result of both sides putting concerted and focused efforts and bringing their subject matter expertise and bringing their goodwill and trust and maybe a little bit of willingness to take the risk, right? Because you and I can have perfect relationships, but if I don't know my business, you will gladly invite me for coffee, but you probably won't invite me to Proc-N-Roll, right? So we all have to bring our subject matter expertise, our mindfulness, our trust, our desire to do good. So it's a work. It's a work, but not all aspects of work have to be challenging. They just have to be mindful.
My mantra is always make work enjoyable. If you're not enjoying your work day to day and your team isn't enjoying themselves, you need to make sure they're enjoying themselves. If you're not having that joy in the work, then that's probably where you should start. So we'll make flows from there. But in terms of practical ways to get it right, so we got the stakeholder mapping. I've got a few more suggestions. One is, being embedded in the strategic planning and budgeting process. So at the beginning of the financial year or even before, while finance are preparing the plan for the year and the budgets, I think it's a great tip to make sure you have those relationships in finance that will loop you in and allow you to sit in on those sessions, those planning sessions, so you can see where the money's being allocated, right? Similarly, in any kind of strategic exco or board meetings, etc., try and get on those as much as you can, or follow at least what's being talked about. I've got one here around developing KPIs. KPIs are so important, but they're so much more powerful when you can link them to a broader business strategy. So they're procurement KPIs, but directly linked to a business KPI like EBITDA or time to market or whatever the business is really measuring. And I've also got making sure, I think off the back of building the relationships, like you said, Natasha, it's making sure you can link the business objectives. So what is important, as you alluded to, is it cost? Is it speed to market? Make sure you've got those drivers sort of core to your planning. So I think that's how you achieve that strategic alignment with the business, and I think that is an absolutely core basic. I mean, Conrad, do you have anything else to add on this particular basic?
No, I mean, the stakeholder map is so powerful. The conversations should naturally lead to alignment in their objectives and, how we support and enable the business. So, as Natasha said, as long as we're not just having coffee and gabbing about the kids, it's very natural to ask for feedback. This is what we're working on. This is what we think you need us to do. And that will lead to a really meaningful conversation. It strikes me that across all those people, you're going to get maybe some different feedback, which is fantastic because that shows, possibly some misalignment on the business side or maybe a broader strategy that's needed or anything else. So, it strikes me this topic, like getting the basics right, can start pretty quickly feeling overwhelming. And so I do think it's important to not let that happen and be willing to start simple. You might be a part of a smaller organization that you don't have enough people or you don't have enough time to do this kind of level of engagement across the organization. And that's okay. Like just start at the top and build down with your resources as far as you can. But, engaging with the stakeholders is super powerful. And, it fits right into what I think my big thing is around visibility. I don't know if we're ready to jump into that, but, I think the big basic that I would say to focus on is, do you have visibility to the important things that matter in your business?
I absolutely think we should jump into it next, Conrad, but I just want to emphasize that point you made around start at the top and then work your way down. It's so easy to get pulled into the weeds, right? So I guess the advice here is keep your eye on the big business picture, keep your eye on kind of the overall business trajectory and how the business, and make sure your team are aware of this stuff as well, because, otherwise they're just operating in a vacuum. You're telling them what the priorities are, but they can't understand it within the wider context of the business. But moving on to getting holistic visibility. So I think that's another really important basic. Can you define for us, Conrad, what we mean by visibility? Is it spend visibility or broader than that?
Well, to me, I just kind of keep it simple. I definitely think it's bigger than spend. But the basics, when I look at it and say, what basics do you really need to have working? You need data, and in the data, and again, you might be in an organization where you don't have fancy data warehouses and super cool visualization tools, but in order to run procurement, you need access to data, and at the core of that, call it data model or whatever, is the transactions that you've been executing on. Very tactical, but here's the transactions, whether it's invoices paid or purchase orders or whatever you have the easiest access to. Those transactions are connected to suppliers, right? So you can take those transactions and you can slice them by suppliers. Those transactions are billed back to cost centers or departments. So then that gives you this connection back to the stakeholder map that Natasha was talking about. At the most basic level, like, you need those things. So do you have access to the data, and are you paying attention to the data to help drive I would say that should help drive a strategic mindfulness about the business and not just a tactical, responsive, reactive view to procurement. So visibility, I would kind of say visibility and strategy versus sort of just react and transact.
I mean, I'm curious, from your experience, both of you as CPOs, how common is it for you to know your numbers? For example, your monthly run rate of spend, right? Or is this data sort of forthcoming, or do you always need to go out and get it unless you have a good sort of process in place?
I think most leaders know what their general spend numbers are. Oh, last year we spent, $300 million or $4.5 million. The big slices of the data, I think, are probably tattooed on the back of the eyelids of the leader, particularly at a certain level. But it also just depends. I mean, you start getting to that next level of data, and you're talking to one of these managers in the stakeholder. Somebody asks you a question, what's that takes you that next level down into the data. I think you need to know your data. You need that visibility, because when you go talk to these stakeholders, by the way. Your stakeholders don't care about your total spend. They care about your spend, their spend. So, you've got to be able to take this visibility and you've got to translate that into who you're talking to.
Yeah, link it to the stakeholder map.
Yeah. So that it really needs that. It really leads us to a place where we need that visibility.
I'd say with the numbers, not only you know them by heart, you know them the years after. I can quote with the 99% accuracy the number is that we were managing 10 years ago. Just because when you're so involved in it, you can't forget it.
Yeah. No, that's my experience as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of visibility, sometimes you need to get to the right level of it does take efforts to get to the right level of visibility at first.
It does, yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also an understanding of sort of the financial plumbing in the business. Ultimately, procurement's responsible for certain scope of expenditure, right? But do you know how the money's flowing from an expenses point of view? All the different channels that money goes out, for example, from the business to pay for services and products. And are you bringing that all into the the scope? Are you addressing it, strategically, holistically? I think that's also essentially a basic, just understanding what those channels are and
For
where
sure.
people spend. Yeah.
And I think it depends on when you say, do you know where the money goes to? It depends who is you, right? So only very, very high maturity organizations, the finance organization knows exactly where the money goes to, or the extent of it, or they understand the duplication of and redundancy of services that they utilize from the same providers where they pay the same thing, right? It's having 57 contracts with the same hotel chain, right? Or like, I don't know, take any airline and have like 20 different agreements with them because each company's entity or geographic representation have their own contractual agreement. So it is the role of procurement to create this visibility in a very digestible format and say, this is where money goes. And there was not a single time when someone in the room would not say, oh, I had no idea. Not necessarily about how much, but if there's a duplication, if there's an efficiency, if there's redundancy, or how much, for example, is spent on something that historically being considered very small spend, because it's kind of like it's not business critical category, but in reality, even though it doesn't represent the core function of the company, it actually, the spend is quite significant.
Yeah, exactly that. Any other practical ways to kind of improve the visibility? I've got one on my notes, make sure you're segmenting your suppliers. I know supplier visibility is key, but it's not just visibility into the spend and the amount of money you're putting with the suppliers is super important, but visibility into what the relationships are like, visibility into the risk profile of some of your suppliers. How are you going to manage them? Would you say, Conrad, that should also form part of it? The visibility of your supply base and your supply chain.
Well, it's funny because the first priority in this is to have the data and get visibility. The very immediately after priority now is actually to focus in the data about what matters most. I mean, the data itself is massive in most cases and overwhelming. And so, we talk about segmenting suppliers. You absolutely need to segment the suppliers so that now you understand, where am I going to focus? You may have 500 or you might have, 50,000 suppliers. In any case, if you have 500, you don't have enough resources to go, do everything for all of those suppliers and everything that you can and should do, right? So to get out of reactive mode, you need to go through that exercise of looking at the data and deciding what to do. It kind of leads to a strategy, right? But that means you have to take the data and you have to make it actionable. And I think that segmentation does that. I mean, Natasha showed us a stakeholder map, and which is awesome, right? But we need to segment the suppliers as well. So then we step back and say, where are we going to focus and what are we going to do? Absolutely key to basic. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of data, a bunch of visualizations, you have knowledge, but turning that knowledge into action, I think, requires the segmentation that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I just want to add to that, Conrad, that traditionally procurement segments suppliers based on the spend. But that's not how legal segments suppliers. They segment them based on the risk.
Yeah.
And it's not how stakeholders segment suppliers. They segment them based on criticality to their services. And that may not reflect in the risk or in, it will reflect in the risk, but may not necessarily reflect in the spend. So it is a role of procurement to kind of like create this 3-dimensional segmentation map to think about a supplier from this 3 perspective: the spend, the risk, and criticality for the business.
Yeah. So
I think
by the way, you're going to have people on your team that are like, I'm going to go talk to those stakeholders. What are we going to talk about? Well, take the list, take a proposal on, this is how our first cut at segmentation looks like. Who are the most important suppliers here? What do you think about that? Where do we get, so this is where the segmentation does require, I mean, we can't even sit in a vacuum and make those determinations about criticality of the business without talking to them, right? So So making it actionable by, getting in and doing that segmentation in collaboration with those organizations that you're talking about. There's so much to do. There's so much to talk about. So, but I know that sometimes it's an excuse. Like, what are we going to talk about? There's tons to talk about because we're collaborating, to get this great value and result together.
Yeah. I love this 3D segmentation, Natasha. I think you've coined a new probably procurement buzzword or consulting buzzword, if you like. There's this idea of 3D segmentation, 4D segmentation, because you can segment across so many dimensions. And I think the ones that you mentioned is so important. And you're right. They're just not, they don't carry through, segmenting for risk is different from spend, it's different from how your stakeholders see. So I'd like to see more procurement teams do this multifaceted segmentation. Often they get stuck because they try to combine too many different lenses into.
Yeah.
But you don't need to do
one of the greatest episodes of my partnership with legal was that when we build volume versus value analysis, and we looked at all number of the entire contract volume, and we compare it with the value. And it actually allowed us to completely reposition how we use legal and procurement resources, because we spent 80% of our time and resources on the contracts that generated 20% of the value, just because there was so many of them. And we found a way what can be put on the POs, what can be put on kind of like just automated bidding, and what transactions can actually go through, regardless of the spend. There was some categories of spend up to $1 million that we decided don't need the contracts because there's no risk associated with this type of goods or services.
So Natasha, when you say value, are you talking about value of investing the work or
value of the contract?
Like the dollar value, or what do you mean?
So how many contracts we between procurement and legal we produce that are under $50,000, under $100,000, under $150,000. So in 80% of contracts volume were under $150,000 of spend.
But what if you have some disguised risk with a supplier? It might not be a
legal. That's why you're
risk.
partnering with legal, and legal know the risks associated with the types of services you buy.
Yeah, so you're segmenting the contracts, right? You're saying these are the where we're going to invest this partnership together. That's brilliant. It's really good.
Yeah, it's just one of the examples how to build close relationships between procurement and legal, because the resources are finite for both organizations, and you just can't go after everything. So you have to determine what's important to the organization. And when procurement is wearing legal hat, legal really appreciates it.
So by the way, that same mindfulness needs to be applied with the risk teams, right? Because the risk teams, I think less mature partnership with legal takes you to a place where you're doing all these contracts that don't bring value or mitigate risk or anything for the company. And on the risk side, I often see the same thing where organizations are trying to peanut butter this risk strategy across every type of supplier and every type of spend in every region. And really, that's where this segmentation is so powerful. So, visibility to what's going on, and then go figure out how to segment it so that you can focus on what matters most. If you can't look at yourself in the mirror and say, we went through this exercise, we now understand and we're focused on what matters most, then I think that you've missed one of the most important basics here.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like we're touching on the edges of the topic of a service taxonomy. So like you have a category taxonomy, but a service taxonomy, which is looking at a service lens. And I think that's how third-party risk management functions usually look at it through that lens, as opposed to a supplier or a category. It's like, what is the service that I'm buying and what are the risks associated with that service? That's probably for another episode. Well, I think those are two great bits of advice for getting the basics right. We do have one more basic that I wanted to raise, which isn't really sort of a day-to-day basic, but it's something you should do on a regular basis, which is perform a maturity assessment of your procurement organization. So how well do you manage and store your data, right? How quickly can you get to the insights? I've come across clients who've spent millions investing in procurement technology, and they still struggle at the end of it, maybe to drive insights in a really fast way or to drive the exact insights that they want without sinking even more investment into data and processes, etc. What about do you have the right roles and skills in your team? Technology, it's a huge minefield, but do you know what your priorities are, right? Buying channels, we talked about those. So Natasha, Conrad, what would be on your list in a procurement maturity assessment?
I would start probably, does the procurement strategy exist? Now, as I am working a lot with the CFOs of various companies, I ask them, how strong is your procurement strategy? And their response sometimes is like, oh, we have procurement strategy. Right. And I often joined organizations that didn't have procurement strategy. So that would be the first kind of like indicator, and whether it had been presented to and aligned with the C-suite. Is it just something, because if it had been, at least it's an unknown that it exists. And if at the end it had been funded, it means that organizations support procurement strategy and procurement development, right? So to me, that's kind of like it's a fundamental step one. From organizational perspective, the way I look at it is that there's certain spend under management that procurement has to process. And does the procurement team have the right number of people and the right skill set to effectively process that spend? Because the absence of the right skill set will not allow procurement to gel that organically with the stakeholders. Because stakeholders are, again, as we said, we will be talking, sipping coffee and talking about kids, but we may not be working together if not the right level of expertise is present here. Conrad, you wanna chime in on the more technology-related aspects?
No, it's interesting because as you're going through this list, I'm kind of thinking that because the way I look at, and I don't want to distract from this too much, but the way I look at the maturity assessment is maybe from a slightly different lens, which is like the result. Like this feels to me like the capability is the capability there, like measuring what are the capabilities. But you can also look at it and say, let's measure the results, right? And some of these overlap with how I look at it. I posted on LinkedIn just the other day, kind of this effect. I can share it in a minute, or I can just talk to it. But the origin of that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, what does the business need from me, and where am I executing? And that took me down over years now. This thought of sort of transaction management at the basics. Are you doing that? Are you doing it well? How does that score? Am I doing RFPs in the business? The just basic, hey, I need something, do an RFP. Am I doing sourcing? So you start working a strategic sourcing, like what does my spend look like? And I'm going out and I'm executing at a strategic sourcing level. And you can argue about like the stack and what you would prioritize in value, but you start moving up this value ladder from the transaction to basic negotiations to sourcing, like strategic sourcing around categories and whatever they might be, to supplier management. Now you have a supplier and you're actually driving to a high level of value. Maybe category management and supplier management are kind of similar in place, but now you're getting this really strategic category management approach. And at the very top of that pyramid, I think you end up with this, you're actually involved in design and consumption discussions with the business, where you're not just saying, oh, they need you to buy a widget, but you're helping them go, well, if we change that thing in the widget and we can actually source it for, more effectively, maybe it's for whatever matters most. So I think looking at it from both ways is actually pretty helpful. And when I started in procurement, Natasha and Zach, you might have seen this, but the big genius of procurement in the days, I think his name was Gene Richter from IBM, and he had this like maturity assessment curve that kind of goes through the same kind of thing. Like, what does it look like that you're creating? And, are you being transactional? Are you being, and sort of looking to see where your team is on that maturity curve. But I think his is a little bit more on the output side than the input side. And I think both are really super helpful because I love this list that you have here because you can sit down with yourself or your staff and you can kind of give yourself a scorecard. Like, how good is our strategy? When did we update it? Who has seen it, like you said, to the C-suite, and go down this list of technology as well. When's the last time we looked at something? Where do we have the most manual work? The supplier relationship management. Do we have a segmentation? Are people executing on it? Do we have a place where we're storing the actions that came out of that? I think it's fairly easy to take kind of this and create a scorecard where you can go through and spend a half hour with your staff and give yourselves a score. And that can, in either case, hopefully this guides you to a place where you're actually going to do something about it, right? The output of all of this is, the basics are, I think, a continual mindset of improvement, continuous improvement in the business.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you should tune into podcasts like Proc-N-Roll so that you can also get some new insights into, your maturity and what other organizations are doing, and learn from that as well.
Yeah. I think the purpose is to start the conversation, right? Like to start the conversation within procurement team on where we stand. And is our current state where we would like to be? Or we aspire to do something different? Be bigger, better, wider, more vertical, more horizontal, more transactional, more operational, more strategic. It all depends on the priorities of the business. So I think we kind of like doing the full circle. We started the conversation today with how to get the which basics we're going to get right. Then we started with alignment with the business priorities and business direction. And I think that having conversation within procurement, maybe within procurement and finance and legal and tech that are close partners of procurement, maybe starting that conversation about where we stand and how do we want to serve the company. I think that this maturity discussion is a great start towards alignment with the business objectives.
Absolutely. It's a great way to get that baseline, and then you can build from that point onwards, right? Conrad, Natasha, thanks so much. I think we've covered a few basics today, which I think are right on the money. So like you said, Natasha, aligning with the procurement, with the organizational objectives and the strategy, getting holistic visibility into your procurement operations, and making sure you keep a tab on your maturity assessment. I think take action today. If you're listening, block time on your calendar to do a self-assessment of your procurement maturity. And use those findings to prioritize so you can invest and improve in the month and quarters ahead. And that might lead you to a full transformation or a series of 1% improvements that will add up to more meaningful progress over time. So, as Natasha's friends and Mike would say, just do it.
Absolutely.
Just do it. Thank you, Conrad and Natasha. Thank you, our listeners, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you. Take care, guys. See ya.
Bye.